will be leading off the conversation here. And next up, we've got Rashida Patterson of DF Fund. Next up, we got Kat Okidegi. Ellen Fissa-High of Web3 and my good friend Tunde of Think Africa.
Good evening, everyone. So thank you. Oh gosh, this is a beautiful crowd. And I know that how many of you in here got drawn in by the title? Thank you. Okay, so we just want to share a little bit about what is this thing that we're doing. It's a 2-day event where we've called the roadshow the Diaspora Roadshow. Can you? Very short story of what this roadshow is. It is, and I'll start off by just having us introduce ourselves. My name is Lola Adedeosho. I am the Executive Director and Co-Founder of Act for Accountability. We are a local diaspora nonprofit organization, and we focus on issues pertaining to building a stronger culture of accountability between Africa and her diaspora. And we do this through civic engagement, we do this through events like these, we do it through supporting local African organizations on the continent with soon-to-be small grants, micro grants. And we're looking forward to having more connections and building more of a robust network with the local diaspora in the DC area.
So I'm Rashida Peterson. Really great to see a lot of faces that I know, some that I don't. Lola and I work together in a partnership that's funded by the MasterCard Foundation that's called Diaspora for Youth. And I am the founder of DF Fund, which is a crowdfunding platform that is meant to connect members of the diaspora here in the U.S. with vetted nonprofits in their home countries. I'm a professional fundraiser and just came up with this idea because was seeing that a lot of funds go to a lot of international NGOs, but not to the local NGOs in country that are indigenous that actually do a lot of the work. And so that's the reason why I'm here today, is to support this connection of, we're all one family and we should all be working together for our development.
Good evening, everyone. How's everybody doing?
Hey!
Putting on my radio voice. Mr. Canada today, Professor O. Shout out to my students from PG Community College back there. I teach, I write, and I produce events. I am particularly interested in the Black cultural diaspora. So whether it's a sellout party, which we just did last week, or 2 weeks ago, which was pretty awesome, or when Harlem came to Paris, I'm definitely interested in the cultural aesthetics around Blackness. And it's been a quarter of burlesque since the first Bring Back Our Girls protest at the Nigerian Embassy. And my company, Low Social Productions, is a sponsor for tonight's event, and we're really proud to be here. So thank you so much for coming.
So hi everybody, how's everybody?
Right.
Okay, good. Alright, so my name is Helen Fissa-High, so I'm gonna say my name. It's Fissa-High, because I got everything from fisheries and everything else. So I have a company called F3 Global. We are a capacity building and strategy firm. We're based in DC, but a lot of our work actually takes place on the continent as well as in the Caribbean, and then we work in Oman. It's like the only Gulf country that we deal with. But what we do is really work to help companies, specifically like entrepreneurs, build up their capacity, whether it's raising capital and funds through bilateral agreements or working with different, development funds or banks or doing things like this to make sure that basically the entrepreneurs on the ground are the people who are actually doing the work, right? And it's our job to facilitate those kinds of connections and networking events so that they can get to the next level, and that's what we do, as well as helping them build up their own company through scalability, through just technical skill sets. And then we also do a lot of platform building. So we have a conference coming up next year. We do a lot of events around the city that are focused around Africa and focused around African entrepreneurship, but we also work within the global health and agriculture space. So I also serve on the advisory board for Diaspora Rise Up. It's really important that we as a diasporans really give whatever we can, right? Whether it's our time, our skill sets, just our connections sometimes, and facilitating the tradition that makes a lot of difference. So thank you guys for being here.
Hello everyone, my name is Tunde Ogunsalu, and I'm a co-founder of Think Africa. And Think Africa is just aiming at connecting young professionals or people in the diaspora to what's going on the ground. So we connect people through events, trips, and shared content. So I mean, we find that many people, want to do business in Africa or want to go, they want to visit. However, the narrative is not always, compelling. It doesn't always make you want to go. So what we've done is put together different curated trips and curated experiences to allow people to experience what's really going on the ground. So we have another trip coming up in December. This is our 3rd year straight. We do trips in December, and we're aiming at doing more trips during the year to get more people back home to just really connect to what's going on the ground and find opportunities for themselves as well. So, Tunde, Think Africa.
So that video that you saw was just a snapshot, like I said. What we plan to do is, this is the official launch of the Diaspora Roadshow. And the roadshow literally means that we're traveling from city to city. And we need your support. DC is the first city that we are kicking things off in, but we are looking to go to New York, Atlanta, Chicago, Houston, LA. Why? Because, when you look at the numbers, the huge populations of members of the diaspora live in those cities. And those are our targets. We have an event on Thursday. As I said, it's a 2-day event. And we want to do this in each city we go to, where we start by having a conversation, like we are here, about the state of the diaspora. How do we build connections? How do we create lasting connections? But then we also want to support members of the diaspora entrepreneurs, diaspora ventures. So on Thursday, we have an event which we're calling Give, Buy, Hire, Black. And it will be at 1230 9th Street. Thank you. 1230 9th Street in DC. And we have 14 wonderful Black businesses that will be showcasing that fit into one of those categories. Either give, buy, or hire them. Or if they're looking to hire other people as well. So that's one of the reasons why our organization is doing this, is because we see that there is a huge need when it comes to diaspora engagement and diaspora support or diaspora community as a whole. But I think our next conversation will dig deeper into what is this diaspora that we're talking about? How does it show up? And using the movie as a reference point is one way. I think everybody has seen the movie. Shout out if you've seen it more than 4 times. Wakanda forever, So using that as a launch pad to have a conversation about what do we need to do. There's a lot that we need to do, there's a lot we can do, and there's a lot that we're not doing. And asking ourselves why. I'm being very honest. So it's going to be an honest conversation, and I encourage you all to be honest with us too, as a panelist. You should have a piece of paper with you. So as we are going through the evening, please write down your questions or comments that you may want to ask the panelists in the future. But just to kind of give us a little bit of a thing, I always like to have everyone have something to do. So for me to you, my ask is we need to make the roadshow real. And we need your support. And so we have pledge cards if you would be willing to help us make this real. So if you are interested in helping support the roadshow in New York, Atlanta, and all these other places, please raise your hand and somebody will get get a pledge card to you. I will say this again in the evening. So I'm just prepping you for the rest of the evening. We got one person right there with a card. Thank you, ma'am. We got two people right now. I'm not going to go to the auction room, but
Don't just eject.
I know, exactly. Like,
Yeah, don't throw that out.
so I'm going to give it over to you. So please let everyone here know what's one thing they can do once they leave here or while they're here that can support not only your organizations but also the roadshow.
For us, we're a new app, and we're in beta right now. We already have NGOs from Nigeria and Uganda on the app, and so my ask is that you go to Google Play or your app store and download DFund. We would really appreciate your feedback, and also just to get some more users on our platform would be great. Thank you.
So, I wasn't prepared for the ask, so this is what I'm gonna ask. You saw the cities, right? New York,
Houston, LA,
Atlanta, Chicago. How many people have people in those cities? Okay, so my ask would be that you contact the people in those cities, tell them to follow Diaspora Rise Up, so that we can get as many folks aware of what's coming down the road with the Diaspora Roadshow.
I'm gonna add to her ask, and then add another ask. So for Diaspora Rise Up, everybody has a skill, right? Who's a great marketer, social media person? Are you a person who can raise funds? Do you work at an organization that might potentially donate to Diaspora Rise Up? So if you look at yourself and your skill sets, your network, and your connections, it's not just about giving money, it's also about giving within your network, right? So if there's something you can do, then please reach out to us and let us know what you can do. So outside of just inviting your friends and your connections to do something, like who could you plug us into, right? It is, you are only as strong as your network. So my other ask though is, how many people have businesses? Right. How many people have businesses that export to Africa or overseas? And how many people are raising capital for your business or know someone who's raising capital? Okay, so there's a gap, right? There's a lot of companies on the ground that are raising capital. There's a lot of capital here. And so we've been working with both sides. And so right now, we have a lot of companies looking for companies that are trying to raise capital on the continent, overseas, anywhere. And so if you know one, if you are one, then come find them.
All great to ask. Got one additional ask for you guys. So my ask is to just look up our website. Is We Think Africa, WeThinkAfrica.com, and just check out our next batch of trips and events. So for us, it's a bit easy because we do a little bit of more like local events, similar to these happy hours and other things. Some fun, some with more substance. But I mean, you can get plugged into sort of a community by just going to our website, which is WeThinkAfrica.com, and then just subscribing to one of our upcoming events.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, that's it? Yeah.
Thank you.
Keep it going, please. Give another round of applause for our wonderful array of partners. As was mentioned here, right, we obviously are here together to bring the diaspora together from all over the world, right, from U.S. to Africa and spread out all over Africa. So again, to remind you of the different asks, right, from Helen was to use our talent, our resources that are available, whatever skills that you have to offer to connect us, let's do that. From today, check out WeThinkAfrica.com. So you can plan your trip, plan excursions, and the like. Get plugged in, of course, to Diaspora Rise Up, promote the Diaspora Roadshow, and grab some of these pledges. Gentleman's out there in the back. She's got plenty to give. I've got plenty that I've got walking around with me. But won't delay the show any further. We're all excited to really get into the meat and potatoes of this conversation tonight. Woo! Come on, y'all just gonna mutter? Really? I know it's been a day. I get it. No, I guess that's cool. But this is kind of a momentous occasion, right? I know Lola and I talked about this before. It feels like it's 2 years ago that Black Panther came out. It was really this February, y'all.
Right.
And we've had quite a year. Heck, we've all had quite a week. But we got to come together and celebrate that moment. Celebrate the moment that we got here together. So let's relive that magic that we had in February by bringing up our panel to break down this conversation from Chala to Killmonger. So let me hear you guys roar with applause. Come on. There we go. There we go. Keep that energy. Keep that energy. So coming right back up to the stage is the wonderful lady who's put this whole thing together. She's going to be moderating this panel, and again, will be a gracious host. Welcome back, Lola! Next up, I'd like to introduce Mr. Corey Brown, who's a professor of history at PG County Community College. Come on, y'all. I heard PG County's here. Next up, I'd like to reintroduce again Ms. Kat Ogedei, who is a cultural architect from Minnesota, Philadelphia. Come on, keep clapping, y'all. That's clever. That's sometimes clever. I'd like to bring up a recent author, Ms. Benga Ogunjini from Go Global, who's written a book, so y'all can check it out and order it right now on Amazon. Wordless Voice, the power of telling your story and defining your identity. Benga, everybody. And you'll see another familiar face. She was just up here. She'll be back up here again. Miss Rashida Patterson. Keep coming. She's coming, y'all. Keep clapping. And our final panelist here, Ms. Gina Page of African Ancestry.
Testing. All right, folks, let's get into it. I may occasionally, while I'm moderating, inject myself as a moderator or take some moderator privileges in here once or twice. But to start off with, we've seen that history has shown that a people's diaspora is very powerful. We've seen from the Jewish community, we've seen from the Irish community, and Africa's diaspora, actually, in the term and the phrase diaspora, is actually one of the youngest diasporas. I think we started using the term diaspora in the 90s compared to other communities. And so, many people will say Africa, you've seen the term, or you heard the phrase, Africa's rising, and I believe it is. So, that being said, what does diaspora mean? I know what it means, and what the African Union has said it means to them is the people, if your person is of African ancestry or identity, but does not live on the continent, and is interested in the development of the continent. And so I am curious, for the panel, if you could just succinctly tell us, what is this concept of diaspora, and what does it mean to you?
Everybody black. Whether they like it.
To me, it means spreading of culture to other areas, and the blending of those cultures from the African root and so the spreading of cultures, the blending of those cultures from the African root, and the adaptation of those cultures to the circumstances that people face. And you can keeping black folks black.
Hi everyone, is it working now? Yeah. Oh, great. Diaspora to me has to do with the culture of black people, particularly Africans who travel from overseas and settle down in the United States. We have a type of culture and a way of interaction, but more recently that have been expanded to become everyone who wants to identify with that community in the United States and other parts of the world.
I'm with Kat. I see it as black people everywhere, but I think in the context of the work that I do, we talk about it as black people outside of Africa, just to make it again, in the context of what I do.
And Gina, before you pass on the mic, so can you say a little bit more about you?
What do you do? So I'm the president and co-founder of AfricanAncestry.com. We're the pioneers. Thank you. We're the pioneers years of genetic ancestry tracing for Black people around the world. And we founded this company 15 years ago, before there was an Ancestry.com, before there was a 23andMe. We were here, one of the first 2 or 3 companies in the industry, and our mission is to transform the way we view ourselves as Black people and the way we view Africa. And we do that through making genetic connections to the continent.
It's hard to follow that. I'm everyone Black too. I mean, I just feel like if you self-identify, so if you identify as a member of the diaspora, then that's what you are.
So this question,
Who's in charge of this?
Can we get somebody from Busboys and Poets to come take care of this mic, please?
so this actually might start off with Gina and Corey, the more academics in this space. Sorry, Professor Kat. I'll come back to you. So when we look at the diaspora of Africa, and correct me if I'm wrong, but we have 3 distinct kind of migration patterns in how the diaspora has been created. Well, we have the transatlantic slavery, which was a big one. We also have the conflict-driven migration, where we've seen a lot of Africans settle in the U.S. as refugees. Especially in Minnesota. A lot of them coming to and settling in Minnesota, especially in the Ethiopian community. We've seen that a lot. And then we have the more recent voluntary migration of the diaspora for economic and for educational reasons, like myself, who voluntarily moved here. And I think that the movie, now switching to the movie, it represented that in many different ways, with Killmonger being the diaspora, obviously, but also that he represents the anger that I think being forced away and being taken away seems to bubble in our community. And so I'm curious, how have you been, whether it's in your field of study, or Gina, in your DNA testing and the trends that you're seeing, how is this reconciliation, or has there been any reconciliation of this concept of the diaspora, bearing in mind the 3 different distinctive ways in which the diaspora has been created?
Ooh, the water interrupted part of that, but we primarily at African Ancestry, we primarily deal with African Americans, so people who were part of the forced migration due to the transatlantic slave trade. And I think we see the range of emotions. I think obviously there's some anger. More than anger though, I see yearning and wanting. So people who look like me, who want to know where they're from, who want to be able to connect more specifically than just with the fabulous concept of the continent. And then I think even more than anger, I see ignorance. People not acknowledging, because they have to know, so I'm not going to say they don't know, but not acknowledging their Africanness and or not believing that it's important and that it's worth understanding more specifically. Does that answer your question?
To piggyback on the level of ignorance, I also know that particularly in America, really globally, there's a lot of anti-blackness around. So what I encountered with when I was growing up, I grew up in Florida. So there's a particular blackness in Florida that is an amalgamation of different people from the diaspora. So I grew up I'm an African American from the root. My ancestors were enslaved in America, they were enslaved in Florida, they were landowners, they connected to Florida, but in Florida, you have large populations of Haitians, Jamaicans, Canadians, Afro-Cubans, Afro-Puerto Ricans, a whole bunch of other people. And I would constantly see people who were black, and they acknowledged that they were vaguely of African descent, but they don't like the connections to the continent, whether they were, or they don't like the connections to the Afro-Caribbean selves as well. So a lot of the diaspora is coming to grips with one's understanding of how you connect to all these other beautiful black people, and just acknowledging that Africa is the root. Yeah.
Can I piggyback on that just really quickly? Another thing we see among people who are from the Caribbean, Afro-Caribbean people, is that they have such a strong sense of nationality for their country, like Trini or Die, you know, the DR, Haiti. So they have that connection with their nationality that we don't have as African Americans. So for them, they don't have the same level of void, where they don't see it in the same way. So it's often a little more difficult for us to have the conversation. Well, you know, before Trinidad, you were in Africa. I don't think it's that the people that I interact with, I don't think it's that they don't want to be African. They just don't feel the same disconnection.
So I'm one of those.
Was that right?
Yeah, you are. The other thing is, so I'm from St. Croix. So I think a lot of it too is, you know, when you grow up on a small island, you're all mostly black, and so there really isn't this like distinguishing thing because you're all just kind of black, and so that's kind of why sometimes you're like, oh, I'm Trini, or oh, I'm from Barbados, or oh, and, you know, there's conflict too within the islands, and so that's part of it. Sometimes it's like you're from a small island and you don't really have like the color thing, so you may have like the island thing. So you're like, nah, I'm from here, you know. And so that's I think a lot of it. And then the other thing is just again like it's so far. If you're from like these islands, every time I tell someone when I'm in Kenya or where our office is, like, oh, I'm from St. Croix, they never know where it is, and so it's like. There's such a distance there too, like there's such a long way to go that sometimes it's very difficult for someone to identify and imagine themselves in that really distant place. Like how would I even get there, or how would I even, you know, begin? Like how do these people look like me? There's like all of these questions, I think. So you just go with what you know, which is you know you're from an island, so go with it. You know, so I think it's something similar to that.
So, can you all hear me? So I am Nigerian American. Like I was born in DC. Both my parents are Nigerian, and I remember some very distinct things. I grew up in Miami. Florida's crazy, and so I grew up in Miami at the time where Haitian refugees were coming, and what would happen is if you were Cuban, you were met at the beach with a cell phone, some blankets, and some family members, and you were like, come on home and you're good. But if you were Haitian, you ended up at Chrome Detention Center. And I grew up being really aware that I was, or am Nigerian. Like up until I was like 5, I thought we lived in Nigeria. Just, you know, we were in DC, I thought we lived in Nigeria. And when we got to Florida, one of the things, one of the first sort of experiences I had was being asked if I had a tail by an African American who was like, I heard Africans have tails. I was like, what? And I didn't really know how to respond to that. I was teased mercilessly for being darker skinned, even though the people that were teasing me were my complexion. You know, my mother loved the woman, God rest her soul. She bleached, so she was much lighter than I was. And so there were all of these colorism and things that I was thrown into that I didn't understand. And then I also had parents who would say, I don't think because you are born here that you're an American. So I'm walking in the world as a Black American, whether I like it or not, whether they like it or not, and they're telling me, just don't worry, because you're not. And it becomes very confusing. So I, as a hybrid child, can see both sides of the spectrum. And what often would happen is we would have people say to my mom or my dad, go back, you know, get on the boat and go back to where you came from. And my mother would be like, well, we came on a plane. I don't really understand. I don't understand what you, or they would think they were insulting us by calling us Haitian. And we were like, no, we're Nigerian, and we didn't realize that they were trying to insult us. And so there was a lot happening in terms of how identity was being played out. And I learned really quickly to be quiet. weird name. I was always the only African kid, and I mean African, like not just the only Nigerian kid, but the only African kid in the class because we were in South Florida. And there was a lot of pressure to figure out how I fit in. And I'm gonna be honest with you, it really wasn't until I studied the history of African Americans that I began to understand and forgive Black Americans for how I was treated. Because it created a lot of anxiety inside of me because I didn't understand where this angst was coming from. My parents were like, we just here because it's got better opportunities. But they had they had their own culture. They had their own language, they had their own food. And you know, there's a tendency, particularly, I would say in my culture, for people to self-segregate. So all the Nigerians, they know where to shop, they party the way they do, we wear the clothes we wear, we do our thing, and you cannot talk to another American and be fine because you'll go to work and you'll deal, but you'll always have your people and your culture. So I do think that there's a taking for granted of that, and it does create the tension, but it's ugly. And one of the things that I'm hoping we can talk about is how to kind of move past that.
Well, I'm from Lagos. Yeah, I'm from Lagos, Lagos, Nigeria, and I'm from Lagos. Yes. So my experience was very different. So when I came in here, I came in my 20s. I was finding myself as a man, and I came with a very deep sense of curiosity. What does it mean to be a Black man? So I came in through a State Department program. And the kind of environment I came into, I was kind of shielded. So I didn't see a lot of people like me in the circles I came into. And so I said, you know what, I took it upon myself to investigate. And when I mingle with my own, that's why I define the diaspora as a culture, particularly among African people. So I was told things like, be careful around African Americans, we are not the same. And so I was very curious of that. And I would hear things like being projected towards me as an African. So I decided to really do my own exploration. So I left my apartment in Northwest. I moved to Anacostia, Southeast DC. I put my office there, I put my apartment there. And I started going to local Black events and really trying to understand, well, what I found out, because I self-appointed myself as a cultural ambassador for one thing. And what I found out, to be really honest in my own assessment, again, I'm relatively new here, but my experience was this sense of indifference and apathy. I understand there's African heritage and richness. How does that help me in the United States? People can't just make that connection. So what I found out is the more I try to explain to them that this is where I'm from and this is how this is helping me in my identity journey, the more they open up to the idea. So my landlord was one of those people I started to talk to, and I used to run a nonprofit that takes people overseas to do volunteer work in Africa, and I recruited her as part of my program. And she went to Gambia to serve, and she married in Gambia. And she married in Gambia. So I say that to say that because I was willing to cross that boundary and border and really have a real definition of what Black means, not just my own parochial understanding of that in Lagos, Nigeria, but what does it mean to be Black in Southeast Anacostia? And how does that parallel my experience in finding myself as a Black man? It was a whole new different world. So that's my experience, this empathy and indifference of how does that really help me? I understand this richness, and that really pushed me forward to like start, this research and the work that I do, and I hope to talk more about that.
So, Lord have mercy. That went perfect. So we'll just share these two. So we'll come back to what you said about identity, but I want to dig a little deeper into some of the sentiments from Pat and Corey. Recently, on Twitter, there's a lot of foolishness that goes on Twitter, unfortunately. I have to be on Twitter for work, as many of us do. There was an incident where after Aretha Franklin passed away, and there were people talking about, who should be part of the memorial to perform, and all this stuff, names are being thrown out. And I don't know if this blogger she's a blogger. Her name is Lovey Ajayi. Made a comment about, someone said Tevin Campbell. And someone's, her comment was a flippant comment, like, what, Tevin Campbell, like, what ruck is he under? Like, and it set off a firestorm on Twitter for 2-3 days, where they came for her edges, her scalp, everything, the change in her pocket, and it got ugly. And I was monitoring the conversation because there were many layers of what I see as that, Killmonger anger that erupted. And then it went over to another website, which really got her over there. People pulling out receipts or tweets from 2007 that she posted. And, it became a minor diaspora wars, so to speak. And some of the comments, the comments to her were, what do you know about Black culture? They called her culture vulture, that she's profiting of, the Black community, but not necessarily wanting to identify as Black in America, because she stands firm as an African and a Nigerian. And it went deeper, and people, I saw that a lot of people were, it's either shade at the fact that she's now, I guess, successful, she has a successful book on the best-selling list. But it came back to this thing of, what is Black culture? Why is it that a person who is Black living in America, Black anywhere, how do we define this Black culture? Is it specifically African American culture? Is that what the sentiment was? But it's been encapsulated in this term Black culture. So I'm curious, is this phrase Black culture, is Black culture being weaponized as a way to segregate and keep us separated?
Thank you for that question. To set some of the context, I love Black Twitter. Black Twitter can be a beautiful tool. But I don't have a dog in this fight per se, but just to set the context with the Lovey situation, people came out with daggers for Lovey because it wasn't just that incident. There's been a whole series of incidents where she has, a kind version would be put her foot in her mouth. Other people would say, have said a whole bunch of anti-African American things, or diasporic superiority kind of thing to kind of belittle Black culture. A while ago, she was talking about Black people in America and said, I don't know why you do this. I grew up thinking everybody in Nigeria, I grew up in Nigeria, I thought everybody had a maid and a driver. And some people took that as, well, one, somebody's driving and somebody's a maid. So, but she said a few things multiple times, and each time people come back to her, they're like, and then they get stabbed in the, which brings up another issue that you touched on. There's a lot of distrust on all different cultures, and like I said, a lot of what I study is Black pride and Black power, but that's intimately tied into anti-Blackness. And in the American context, many African American, the experience has been any immigrant group, whether that be an Asian community or whatever, one of the first things people learn when they come here is African Americans are those people over there. And to disassociate themselves. So whether those are Black people or other minority people, they adopt this kind of, yes, I'm Black from whatever, or I'm Asian from whatever, but they use like almost like a model minority kind of myth to say, we are not white, but we are not them. And there has been a lot of, I guess, anger within the Black community that has lashed out, particularly an African American community that has had a history of cultural and political protests that have literally lifted up every facet. Women, gay people, other minorities have come on, piggyback on the fights that these people have fought, and some people just lash out, and they do it in very unhealthy ways.
So,
I just wanted clarity on what is diaspora specifically?
Meaning, what I was saying is there's a notion that some people that are not African American, when they migrate to America, they look at themselves as being culturally not as low as African Americans.
it's like the better black sleep.
Yeah.
So if so this happens. You are an African American, you're here, somebody comes in from Jamaica or comes in from Nigeria or comes in from Egypt, and technically this country has decided that all of you are black. But for that white, supervisor or whatever, he looks at that immigrant and says, "Oh, you work harder than Joe over here." And it's only because Abdul might have a completely different perspective in how he is coming into the space. But what happens is, if he's not aware of the history, he doesn't understand that he's being elevated in this space. And as a result, making Joe feel like he ain't, he's nothing. And really, it's part of the system. And so they're elevated, and there's like, "Oh, you're not black. You're black, but you're not black." Like, I've had people say, "Oh, you're not like them." I'm like, "Who's them? Who's them?" Because it's all us. Like, what do you mean? So there's this picking, this kind of, we're going to pick out the people that we're going to call black, but we're not going to treat them the way we treat African Americans. And real talk, a lot of immigrants benefit from that. They really, really do. And we have to be willing to have that conversation. The lovey thing, this is what I will say. I've been silent on this because I've been trying to be quiet, but since you brought it up, since you opened the door, I'm gonna walk through it. All right, so here's the issue. Part of the issue with the okay.
Go down running in track.
I know. Okay. So part of the issue with Lovey is that if you watch her trajectory, if you did not know her last name was Ajayi, and if you didn't understand that that's a Nigerian name, you would assume that she's African American.
Right.
She uses vernacular. She's really good at writing in a style that makes you think sister girl from down street, and she's done quite well with it. But she's Nigerian, and because she's Nigerian, her perspective is different. It just is. And when she made that comment about how I just assumed everybody had a driver and a maid, Nigeria is one of the most populous countries on the continent. So it is not unusual to be sort of middle class and have a driver and house help and all these other things. It's actually just it's a very normal situation. But it's a very flippant comment to make when you don't understand the context. So she has definitely benefited from being Black American in the way that she shows up. And I think for a lot of people, because I don't know if you all saw when the Black Lives Matter thing, she was criticizing Black people for not wanting to work with whites, and it just blew up and became crazy. Over time, she has been doing and saying things where it sounds like she is separating herself from Black Americans, but at the same time, using Black American vernacular culture language to move forward. And so I think a lot of people are sort of having trouble with that. The problem that I have with it is, you want to be mad at Lovey, be mad at Lovey. But don't throw the entire continent in the trash in the process. So some of the things that I've seen are extremely anti-African. And I'm like, okay, that doesn't make any sense either, because I'm not Lovey. I don't think that way. And so part of it is we have to figure out how to be angry at the specific person and not treat the whole, that person as representative of everything. Because trust me, there's a whole Nigerian coalition like, what are we gonna do about her? She's a problem. Like, we've had conversations like, girl, we're gonna have to get rid of her. She's a problem. So, there have been some, well, not get rid of her, but there's been some WhatsApp conversations like, yo, the West African contingent is wondering what we're gonna do. We gotta trade her out because it's embarrassing. So it's not like we don't see it, but it's also unfair to make it about all Africans, if that's what usually happens.
Yeah, that was Tanya.
But yeah, you have Tanya. So yeah, that's true.
Well, when I think about the question of Black culture, I don't really know so much about Lovey. When I think about the concept of Black culture, I'm very big on community. I think there's power in community numbers. And I see opportunity here. And I see opportunity for fragmented community to be a stronger community. And the big picture is not really what someone said or what someone thinks. Reading power players that are behind the scenes really don't really want that union to exist in the first place. So why are we now embracing someone's this plan or this strategy to bring the vision? And if you look at the community historically, even in Nigeria, we don't have racism, we have class, we have tribalism. So there's always this stigma and this burden of fragmentation and division whenever the word blackness come around. So my contribution to that is that I'm a recently published author. I have to find a way to talk about my book. Yes. Yes. So in fact, I wrote a book about that.
What's it called? There you go.
Oh, thank you very much. It's called Borderless Voice.
And how do we find it?
In fact, I brought some copies with me. Yes. Yeah, it's called The Power of Telling Your Story and Defining Your Identity. So what I said is that our story as an individual, as a corporation, as a business, as a people, as a community, is our strongest asset. So I do life coaching, and in my life coaching practice, what I did was extrapolate insights from the trajectory to breakthroughs of the people I serve as insight any one of them can apply to their lives. And when you look at the concept of storytelling, there's this model that when you ask someone what's your story, oftentimes they tell you I was born so I'm from Africa, I'm from DC, and I grew up this. But it's a whole new model of something that is more forward-looking and future-oriented. And in application to Black people, in the context of community, I think we have to look at Black culture as this new story we are changing the narrative, and we are all yearning to tell. And we see a lot of similarities or commonalities working for us. Now than ever before in the culture, there is this yearning of people really embracing their Black identity. Why don't we use that as a starting point for unity, rather than what someone tweeted or someone didn't tweet? Again, I wrote a book about it. It's called Borderless Voice, and I'm happy to talk to you about it.
Gina, I have a question.
I wrote the foreword to Borderless Voice.
I'll try and project. Can everyone hear me? Can you hear me?
That one's working.
Can you hear me? No.
It was
All right, I'll
working.
just project. So Gina, I'm really curious because I've always, ever since I found out about AfricaAncestry.com, I've just been fascinated. I haven't taken the test yet, however, I will. But I'm curious, when it comes to trends, we see now on TV, 23andMe and all that kind of stuff. Yes, please support AfricaAncestry.com because one, they are not selling your information to pharmaceutical companies. If you didn't know that.
They don't keep your data.
They don't keep, yes. So I'm curious though, what are you seeing when it comes to people who are using your services, and also some of the trends that you're seeing in that field of work when it comes to people of the diaspora?
So, when we were talking about Black Panther, we're here because of that. And we saw an explosion in our business in February as a result of, one, Chadwick Boseman shouting us out on the Breakfast Club and us turning that into a Facebook ad. But two, this excitement about being African. So the collective consciousness around Africa was raised, and we benefited directly from that. As AfricanAncestry.com, but when we benefit, everyone benefits, because when you find out not just that you're African, we already know that, not that you're some percentage African, we know that, what difference does that make? But when you find out the people and the places that you're connected to, then your story broadens. You have a bigger story now. And so you don't look at the divisions the same way. The divisions go away. In large part. In terms of other people, of Africans who already know where they're from, like you guys, we are starting to see, in fact, we had a call last week or this week, we're starting to get inquiries from people who were born on the continent, who are saying, I want to take the test because I'm not sure. I think I grew up in Sierra Leone, but I think my father's family was from Mali. So while I'm very anti our colleagues in the industry because I think that they are defining a narrative for us as Black folks and our ancestry and our identity that is off base, I do credit them with raising an overall awareness. So we can't afford to advertise on television. But when they do it, you at least know that this is possible. And if you're a critical thinker and if you are a wise consumer, you're going to do some research before you just go and spend your money, and then you'll get to us. So I think that they've helped raise awareness in general that we wouldn't have been able to do. And again, as a community, as the diaspora, we all benefit because the divisions and the borders are falling away.
Rashida, I know you found out you've done, or is it your dad who did the testing? Yeah. Can you say a little bit about?
So, I do think it's, as an African American / Caribbean American, / I do think that when you get the testing done, that I know for our family, it was like, oh, now we're this. And like we had this whole like family email chain that went out, and it was like, this whole big thing. There was like 40 of us on there. We're like, so now we can say that we're from here and from here, and like this is the. And I do think it gives you a sense of like pride in at least knowing, the history of African Americans in this country and like how it's just a constant fight every day, and it's like a constant like pushing. I think that for me personally, it gave me a little bit more of like next time someone comes to me with something crazy, I'm gonna tell them exactly where they can go. So yeah, I think it's important that everyone that has those questions does it for their own personal benefit and for just a knowing and an awareness, and then you can research your family in Nigeria or Congo or whatever.
So, wait, just before, there's a follow-up, because you do a lot of work on the continent,
Yes.
Since your offices are in Kenya. How has been your experience having the reverse? So it's African Americans working on the continent. Because I am not we have our biases. I know that when we're in Lagos together, they called you Oyibo. And for people who are, you're in Yoruba language, Oyibo means white, Caucasian. She's clearly not. However, she was called that many, many times in different locations. And so, and I know it kind of was like, she was like, no, I'm not white. Like, why do they call me white? But I think it's also because of the complexion. You're in a darker skinned area. But how has your experience been as having the reverse? Being, quote unquote, not the anger, but representing the diaspora, working on the continent?
Yeah. So that's a really good question. So I've been to 36 African countries. So I started my career working with 10 countries in East Africa for the Department of Commerce. So I will say that, and I went to University of Maryland right down the street. Go Terps. So I will say that it has been a process because I think a lot of times African Americans sometimes have like what it should be when you get there, and 9 times out of 10, like no one's gonna like welcome you home with like, like you're not gonna be standing at the airport with the banner like, thank God you made it, like you made it back. And I think that sometimes when I talk to my friends, I'm like, you gotta take me back with you, and I'm just like, whoa, like let's like bring down these expectations, because people, you hype it, right? You thinking that it's gonna be like people are gonna be so welcoming when you like land in, I mean I get that treatment now, but I think that there's these expectations, and I know I've done a lot of like educating people that I know that I went to school with, that are, I went to high school here, so I've done a lot of educating, because I think sometimes the perception is like, okay, you're coming with dollars, you're black, you're expecting, so they already see you as an outsider because you have dollars and you probably have, money to spend in a particular country. And I know for a lot of African Americans that do work on the continent, sometimes that's a big thing. I used to work for an organization that will remain nameless. But we used to do these like summits on the continent. And we did one in Tanzania one year, and it was so difficult. It was a lot of church groups, and you would think people that believe in God would be nice and be like, it was not the case. And there were many times where people would be, treating the hotel staff really badly and saying things even, to people's faces about like smells and this and that. It's just, I think we all have to, do research and just come with an open mind and an open heart when we are venturing to go anywhere, because you never know, what your experience is going to be and what, and how they're going to see you as an American and then as a Black American. Like, there's so many layers there. I mean, I could go on and on and on about this for a long time, but I won't, because I know y'all probably have questions and you want to get to your questions. But yeah, so I think that that's the main thing, is that there's a lot of expectations, and I think sometimes it's really good to do research before you go and have connections there so that you have the best time. Of course, I'm the Mzunga in most of where I go, and I'm kind of okay with that now. I mean, it is what it is, so.
I just say quickly out here to you, Ranga, but slavery worked. It worked. And the whole point of it was disconnection. Mm-hmm. And so just as we're fed negative stereotypes about Africans, Africans are fed negative stereotypes about us. So we have to be conscious. And if you're conscious and you walk into these situations, then you can manage your expectations.
So I just wanted to add a little bit, because this is something that happens often, and I'm always concerned about it. We have to stop romanticizing the continent. It's not, everybody wasn't a king and a queen. It's not possible. It's not possible. So we really need to look at the continent and its people in these very realistic ways. I also want to say that there is something really powerful to me, as someone who studied the history of African Americans, about African American culture. And I think that sometimes what happens is in this wanting to get back to the source, which I think is important, we overlook what it takes to survive, what that forced migration does to people, and to be able, when I think Black culture, I think oftentimes what we're defaulting to is African American culture, whether we want to admit that or not. A lot of the narratives, a lot of the stories are based on an African American experience, and it is one of the most globally known cultures across the globe. I mean, like, it's an amazing thing. You can go to Morocco and meet people who know Tupac lyrics but can't speak English. I've met people who know Tupac lyrics but can't speak English. I mean, you got Chinese people singing R&B songs. Like, when you think about African American culture specifically, it is all over the world. So I think we have to really, in this conversation, also take a minute to understand that the richness of what was created in spite of what slavery has done is something that needs to be celebrated too.
Yeah. So what I wanted to add to that is, my experience was very similar but on the reverse. So I came here from the continent, and there is this empowerment that comes when you know your identity and who you are. And just to put it in context, so in Nigeria we have 3 major ethnic groups. So we have Hausas to the north, Yorubas and Igbos to the south. And those ethnic groups have core values attached to them. Yorubas have spirituality and scholarship. Igbos have entrepreneurship. Hausas have leadership. It's the very core of the DNA of who they are. So I really applaud what Gina is doing, giving us this opportunity with science to actually have a direct impact to who we are, and we can say, this is the history of my people and this is where I come from. And when we're trying to like expand this definition of Black culture from a story, from a narrative standpoint, there's a lot of empowerment that comes to that. And everyone in this room, if you ask an average person where you're from, they might say South Carolina, right? But in South Carolina, they have re-established that there's this direct correlation to Sierra Leone and people with rice planting and agriculture and agribusiness. And I'm seeing people really finding purpose and calling and identity and say, this is really why I'm here, because they're able to take the narrative of the people they come from and make a direct parallel to their lives. And now you can do that with science, and now you can do that with storytelling. So I think we have more opportunities than we've ever had in the past. I just want to mention that.
I'll say it again, anti-blackness, like the study of anti-blackness is a real part of my existence. I look at it everywhere. And it doesn't have borders, it's everywhere. So as you're saying, slavery worked, but so did colonization. And there, like, I'm glad you brought up the divisions and the notion that people need to know where they're from, but also some of these divisions, ethnic divisions, national divisions, they're put on them to show how disconnected these people are. So there's internal fighting with ethnic groups, whether that's African Americans versus Afro-Brazilians or like Yoruba or Hausa or whatever. And what this does oftentimes is not allow us to appreciate the cultural connections. That's not what you're saying, but like all this culture, whatever developed in African American culture is directly connected to Africa. Like all African music, and really the only original forms of American music are based upon African music. Now, Black folks created all that stuff, whether it's rock and roll, gospel, all this stuff they adopted and did that. And one thing, because your original question about culture, one thing I'm glad you mentioned that African American culture is everywhere. At the same time, I don't think African Americans or any other people appreciate African American culture to the extent that it is, because historically African American culture has been looked at as being jungle music or the low forms of when jazz first created, it was about those music that those people did over there. When hip hop created, it's about that urban music that is nothing. And so African American vernacular English is bad English, just like pigeon and all other stuff. So everything that people do, people don't see the dynamic beauty in the language. I'm looking at Zora Hurston, who I named my daughter after. And people are taught that when she uses that language, how beautiful it is. And it creates a situation where other people might benefit from African American culture directly, but they also don't necessarily appreciate African American culture as a legitimate, beautiful, and powerful culture connected to everything else. And that, I mean, I just wish, I teach African American studies, African American history, U.S. history, diaspora classes, and I tell my students on the first day that my only goal for the semester is for them to leave at the end of the semester a little less anti-Black than they were when they started. Because, I mean, it's rooted in everything we do. And I just love Black folks. I love Black folks.
So I am going to open it up for questions from you before we have one or two more closing questions. So
If you have a question.
All right, questions from the room? Anybody? They've answered everything for you?
No.
Oh, okay.
So back to your comment earlier regarding the open heart and the open mind when you travel, when you go abroad. Do you think if we practice that in our everyday lives, that would make us
So just to repeat the question, in terms of open hearts and open minds, yes, I do think that having an open heart and an open mind is, I think Gina mentioned it very well, to be conscious that not everyone has the same upbringing as you, not everyone has the same access to resources. I mentor here in DC with an organization called College Bound, and not everyone is the same, comes from the same background, not every kid is the same, and I think that in our daily lives, trying to keep be aware of that, be aware of the fact that not everyone has the same story, which is actually the richness of it, is important, and it helps us to stop and think before we act, and to have better experiences and relationships within our community. So yes, thank you for that easy question to start us off. Does anyone else?
Yeah, I think somebody else had a question. Right here. Oh, right here. Oh, okay, this one in the back. Okay.
Yes, good evening. I had a question regarding where the panel seemed to arrive near the end of the discussion, and that is history looms large. It would appear to me that the best of our people, Africans at home and abroad, have come about as a result of collaboration. I think of, in fact, the greatest advances that we've made as a people has come about as a result of collaboration, both of those on the continent and outside of the continent. And I think about figures like Trinidadian Henry Sylvester Williams.
Can you pull the mic away from your mouth just a little bit?
Sorry.
Yeah.
Think about figures like Trinidadian Henry Sylvester Williams, C.L.R. James, George Padmore, who worked with Kwame Nkrumah, people like Walter Rodney from Guyana, who not only had activism in Guyana, but taught in Jamaica, taught in Tanzania. Think about other figures like Kwame Ture from Trinidad, who wound up in Guinea. So there, W.E.B. Du Bois, Shirley Gillian Du Bois, who wound up in Ghana with Kwame Nkrumah. So there's this rich history of collaboration that has resulted in the advancement of our people, whether it's the fight against civil rights or discrimination here in the U.S., or the fight against colonialism on the African continent. So I'd like to know if you could elevate those figures and maybe share them as models for aspiration for this generation, seeing that they put in the work before.
Thank you.
I mean, I think what you're saying is important, and I think it brings me to my issue all the time, is that we don't spend enough time teaching this. Or, like, if you want to learn about African American history, unless you're going to just do it yourself, you have to, in school, you have to sign up for it. It's not something that everybody gets exposed to. So I think what you're saying is important, because I do think we all need to start maybe thinking about how can we inform ourselves and each other on a regular basis, not just during Black History Month, not just when somebody passes, but Yotasake Shange just passed away on Saturday, and when you think of the body of work that she's created, she is the Black aesthetic, in very important ways, because she's told Black women and writers across the board, speak and write in a way that makes sense for you, and the people that get it will get it, and I think there's something very powerful about that. So what I would hope, and what I would throw out is that, we just need to make sure that we're enriching each other and sharing what we know. Because even the elders, like sharing these stories, like just making sure that you talk to grandma and learn about what happened, what her life was like. I think that's a way to increase that space around storytelling and creating, getting rid of the borders.
I also think that we need to stop. It's an element of laziness that I see when it comes to actually being intentional. We are quick to celebrate in many aspects of our culture, but we don't want to take the other aspects of it. And that's the part I hope, and I hope, pro #Wakanda effect, that I'm calling it, that we go beyond just the culture, the arts and culture side of embracing, that we go deeper into their social issues that tie both of us. They look different on this side, but it is similar to what's going on the continent. We're having issues of human trafficking, women being trafficked on the continent. And it's oftentimes for me in our work, it's a challenge to engage our communities here to care about issues over there. And it's very understandable why. There's a lot of issues we gotta deal with over here. And it's how do we recognize that, the challenges and the struggles and the pain and the vulnerabilities that are happening on the continent are affecting us here, whether we realize them directly or not. Where you're spending your money on resources that are coming from the continent are child slavery, all these things. Again, sex trafficking, human trafficking, these things are happening and we don't realize them here. So there has to be, just as you said, going deeper beyond wearing the Ankara print, beyond, dancing to Afrobeats. It's let's get into the other side of things that we don't talk about that is often masqueraded in different ways. So,
Thank you. My name is Michelle. So, I have a question. One of my biggest concerns is as an African American, and I moved here about 11 years ago. It's good, the fact that African, not just African, black people, why are we so still stuck on color? The fact that we have the light skin, you guys mentioned it earlier, the light skin, dark skin debate. You go on Twitter, you go on Instagram, people are always talking about it. And for me, especially kids, and my kids, high school and all that, I was recently watching a video on YouTube about, kids' opinion, about their opinion on, who would you date and all that. And all I was hearing was just, I would light skin, I would dark skin. And it's like, to me, it's like, to the eyes of the white man, we are black, and it seems like people are not very aware of it. I guess my question is, what can we do in today's world in 2018? For me, in the world that we're living in today, we can do better than that. So what can we do as a people to foster the children and even people like us talk about it?
Okay. Once again, that's anti-blackness. It's anti-blackness and it's colorism, and it's global. It's not necessarily pretty much. Andre 3000 used to wear a shirt that said, "Why is it that the darker-skinned people of the world, wherever you are treated the worst?" That's a case, whether that's in Alabama or Algeria or India or whatever. Many of the images that people project show that lighter reflections of beauty, whiter reflections of beauty, are the personification of beauty. So people subconsciously adopt these kind of notions, and they emphasize the notion that if the straighter one's hair is, the narrower one's nose is, the paler one's complexion is, the more beautiful they are. And people adopt that. It's a huge issue going on right now in America, but it's also global. So particularly in the Caribbean and throughout much of Africa and India, bleaching creams are
Korea. Multi-billion-dollar industry of bleaching cream.
If you're a capitalist and you want to invest in a company, a bleaching cream company will get you a lot of money. But your question was, how do you resist against that? So there are growing movements, everything from, I hate even call it that, the fact that I even have to call it like a natural hair movement, to show people that different reflections of blackness are also beautiful. There's also a flip side of that. There's a danger in, the whole colorist argument is in the movement of trying to say that darker reflections of blackness are not good. The danger is to say that lighter reflections of blackness are somehow less authentically black and less authentically beautiful, And it's just it's a tightrope, and that's being black is just a tightrope. And I just wish people could just love black in every component of blackness.
I was just going to add that it's really, you got to start with yourself. You know, if you feel good about who you are, then it's easier to feel good about who other people are, and it's easier to resist the labels and the influences, subconscious or conscious, that are placed upon us. So I would say start with yourself, and when people, you know, when you encounter people who have those attitudes, you speak up against them.
It takes work, and I think we have to be willing to do the work. I had 10 nephews and nieces. Hey, Jasmine, one of my nieces is here. And I spend a lot of time, you know, getting them to understand that, you know, we're not gonna watch Disney princesses. Like, there's a rule at Eddie's house. We don't watch Disney. You know, Black Panther's the only exception. But you have to do the work. And one of the things that I sat down with my nephews one day, and because I was listening to them talk about their preferences, I'm like, what are your, all the people in your family are chocolate, so what's really going on with your so-called preferences? Oh, Auntie, I just like what I like. I'm like, well, where does that come from? So I think we need to be willing to check our children, at least ask them where they're getting this from. I think we need to ask ourselves these questions. Like, you know, a friend of mine made this really good point that I'd never thought about. She was like, you know, the fact that she, as a darker skinned Black woman with this natural hair, feels the need to lay down her edges. She was like, is that white supremacy sort of taking over me that I have to lay down my edges? And I was like, oh my God, I never thought about that. But when we think about the things that we do, no, seriously, I mean, when you think about it, like edges and the importance of edges and edge control and all the things that we do, like what is that, what does that mean? One of the most amazing scenes is when the Queen Mother, Angela Bassett, has taken off her crown, and her edges are just fluffy and white. I was like, oh my God, that's amazing. So we have to be willing to check it in ourselves, and it takes work. Like, you have to ask yourself consciously what is going on with the decisions that you're making. Are you judging people based on, I had a friend recently who got feedback. She's brilliant, and one of the things that she was given back to her was that her hair was distracting and unprofessional, because it was natural and it was just out and it was doing her thing. And this woman who criticized her was a Black woman who hadn't listened to anything that she said, was just mad at her hair. And it was really hurtful for her in 2018 to be still having to deal with this issue of what her hair is doing. So I do think we have to understand that white supremacy is everywhere. Like, in terms of what it tries to do, we have to, every day, like you said, it's a tightrope. You're always fighting that struggle. Because anti-Blackness, it seeps in all kinds of ways. You don't like the server because of the way she pops her gum and the way she walks, or you're looking at her hair or looking at his beard and you're saying, well, that's not professional. Like, we're telling boys that in order to be successful, they can only wear suits. They have to be clean shaven, they have to cut off their locks, or whatever else we're telling folks. And we have to ask ourselves, what exactly are we pushing when we do that? And so I think it's on all of us to check each other, to check ourselves, and to do it with love. I mean, you just don't want to roll up on somebody, but you do want to ask those questions, and you want to be mindful that we are all we're all journeying together, and we're at different levels. So we can't expect or put our expectations on other people. You know, we all have a certain amount of stuff that we start with, but we have to build it little by little.
So so the young lady, Mark, and then and then the two of them, and then unfortunately after that.
Hello everyone, I'm Professor's old student. So one of the things that kind of caught my attention was, I forgot your name, but you were talking that you are from the Caribbean and how the Caribbean people does not identify themselves as Africans. So first of all, I want to make this rectification. Haitians really is proud to be African. Because we are the first African country to be free in 1804. We are proud to be from the continent of Africa, and I represent myself as African on a daily basis. But my question is, to other Caribbean countries, how can we kind of help these people to connect to their culture, to the African culture and their heritage? Thank you.
Okay, so thank you for that. Just to clarify, I wasn't saying that people from the Caribbean, so I can only speak for myself, that they don't see themselves as African, but where in Africa? I mean, I think that that's a whole thing, right? Like, you know, if you're from an island, you would most of the time identify yourself as from that island, right? So, I mean, I would never, as a kid, walk around and be like, I'm African. I would be like, I'm Crucian, because that's what I was. And that's what I knew until I did the testing, until our family did the testing. And then I can say now, yes, I'm Crucian, but I'm 33% Nigerian, because I know exactly, because I know exactly, what the breakdown is. And I think when you, again, this is for me, sometimes when you present yourself as African, that can be a little squirrely too. Because I know a lot of people on the continent will be like, Africa's 55 countries, like, where are you from? So I think we all have to be mindful and cognizant that while we want to have that connection, if you show up in Ghana and you're like, I'm African, I mean,
But we could say though that Ghana is a unique country.
That's true. Ghana is unique because they allow us to come home. So
exactly.
Cool. Sierra Leone too, so we cool with them
exactly.
too. But I'm just saying that you just have to be mindful of just saying Africa, because that can be sometimes offensive as well. And it's just like it's a education thing. I don't think that anyone means any harm by it. I think the way people identify is how they identify. How Caribbean people identify is how they identify, depending on where they're from. And there's lots of Indians from Trinidad. There's lots of Chinese from Trinidad. So, I try and stay away from sort of identifying for other people and just identifying like my own personal.
I just want to make one quick. So our test is different than the test my sister took. We don't deal with percentages. We look at her father took. We don't deal with percentages. Okay, well, I didn't want, you have questions. All right, what do you deal in? We look at single branches of the tree. So instead of looking at your entire mix and saying you're some percent from here and some percent from there, like our colleagues do, based on no more than 1,400 African samples, we look at your mother's line going back 500 to 2,000 years, and we make a determination based on over 33,000 African samples. Specific, not to regions, like the region of Nigeria, whatever that means, or the region of Cameroon/Congo, or whatever else you get with those. But the present day countries, because that's the best we can do, the present day countries, and then the ethnic groups within those countries. So we look at mother's lines and father's lines and get very specific versus looking at everything and giving you these random percentages.
Shade. It's on her face. Oh, my.
I just had a question beyond the conversation that we're having, which is robust and constructive. What can we do now to put forth like a plan of action so that we're bridging this gap? Because the conversation is great, but I'm ready to mobilize and organize and take some action. And what role do politics play?
That's for a whole different conversation.
I'm going to take the first pass at it. Mike's going around the panel. The first thing you can do, first thing that everybody can do, is participate in part 2, which is our Diaspora Roadshow. The whole focus of the event is to give, buy, and hire Black. And you can start by doing it tonight by buying Ben's book. You can buy Black.
And you can buy yourself a test.
And you can buy yourself a test.
And you can pledge. And you can pick a pledge card.
You can make a pledge. So there's plenty that we can do right here, and it continues again on Thursday, and quite frankly, it continues 365. So this is a great place to be in. I'll let the panel take this as I go through the next question.
First step an individual can do is make friends. So go out and find people. Don't just like, oh, you're Nigerian. Let me just, what you. I don't want to say that, but do that actually. So find people of different cultures. Learn something about them, not as like the pet people, but become engaged in people, and find out where the cultural similarities and differences, and get to know people. The more we know each other, the more we see that your culture is not that different than mine. That's the first step. The political question is that's interesting. We were talking about this and. America is a racist country. So, I mean, it is. It's just historically racist. So, oftentimes we form our little enclaves and think that what's going on in the world only doesn't affect us. So, politically speaking, we have an administration that just announced that they're going to try to get rid of the 14th Amendment, which they're not really going to do.
Can't do that.
They can't do it. But the whole notion is, some people see that as not a black issue, they see it as a Latino issue. However, because America's a racist country, our immigration policies are racist. That means...
Actually, take a step back. Why is the 14th Amendment important?
The 14th Amendment gives establishes citizenship. So it says it was established after the Civil War, and it was a way to bring black people as official citizens whose ancestors probably lived here longer than many of the white people who were living in the country at that time. So it basically says that all people who are born or naturalized inside the United States are citizens of the United States due to all the rights of citizenry that anybody else. So it doesn't, in modern day terms, it doesn't matter if your parent was from Guatemala and crossed the Rio Grande into the United States, legally or illegally, if they had you here, 2 seconds after they crossed into America, you are U.S. citizens for the rest of your life. Or if you moved here from Nigeria, you were 80 years old, got your took the oath of citizenry. The moment you take that oath, you're an American like anybody else. They can't treat you different. Now, when we look at movements, whether those are actual political movements or really just signs to other people that they're going to other a group of people in America, it allows for people to be treated as others. And those will go down the line. So we can say, oh, that's not going to affect us. Those are those Latino people over there that he said Mexicans were rapists and all that. That's not us. It is you. It's all of us. And so to get people politically engaged, to start talking about these issues, and do that as you make friends, start talking about these issues, seeing how they connect to one another. It is an inspiration to become more politically engaged. And then just try to make sure that when your politicians that you're voting for pass immigration policies and other policies, they're not doing it to negatively target people of color in particular.
On that note, not a sponsored ad, but please vote November 6th, and please get all your friends and family members across the country to vote. So, yes, vote November 6th. Mark.
I just wanted you to say something about Africans rising.
Well, you can say it since you have the mic.
No, you know a little bit more better than I do. There's a new Pan-Africanist movement that's taking off, and I think you need to just say something how they can get involved.
So, Africans Rising, I'm, I guess, a member of a group of Africa Conscious, Pan-African, all Black liberation individuals who are very concerned about the state of Africa and African people and children of Africa. So basically, you Black. What the group is doing is how how can we own and claim this narrative? First of all, it was a marketing ploy, this whole phrase, Africa Rising. But how do we own that to be a more active role for us to play when it comes to real social issues in the United States, across the board, or anywhere where the people of Africa live? And that's what the group is. It's we just met recently to talk about, not amongst many things, it's the next generation of civic-minded Africans, as we all are. You know, I think after this conversation, I know being very careful of saying I'm African, but it's how do we recognize that there are constantly forces and powers that want to make sure the segregations and the stories, the narratives, as well as the real harm that is being done to people, whether you're interested in journalism, freedom of speech. We see it on the continent too, in certain countries, where journalists are being imprisoned or political opponents are being imprisoned or they disappear. You know, these are stories and these are issues that are not getting out. These are issues and stories that we're not, we don't have enough collateral power as a group to actually really force it. But there are amazing people on the continent. There are amazing people here who are using arts, who are using, you know, policy, who are using all means to make sure that the forces that are trying to continue to keep and to rip the people of Africa apart don't succeed. And we're doing it in our ways, in our own work. Me being through Act for Accountability, it's in our name, Act for Accountability. We focus on governance, transparency, and civic engagement, because we believe that a people are government. And too many times we see, because of history, because of, you know, just real impunity. I mean, when we were doing the Bring Back Our Girls, our organization was formed during the Bring Back Our Girls movement in 2014. It was a protest that started off the whole thing, where 276 girls in Nigeria were kidnapped. But we couldn't get any information about them. I reached out to the government asking questions, and I did not get answers. And as a Nigerian citizen, as a human being, as a citizen of the world, nobody should be treated, no human being deserves to be kidnapped because you want an education. They're not property, they're not chattel, they deserve the right to be educated, they deserve the right to be free. And so that's where the organization was founded from. And since then, we've grown into doing other things because we recognize the need for education. So Africans Rising, I found Kim with Africans Rising, of people who are amazing scholars on Black history, Pan-Africanism, as well as all these other concerns, political and otherwise, that really want to make sure that there is a force that constantly counters this narrative, or a force that is standing up for truth, justice across wherever Africa's people are.
Hello, brother and sister. My name is Jacqueline Odisha. I'm originally from Cameroon. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you. Yeah, I'm originally from Cameroon. I have a comment. Michelle asked the question, what are we going to do about the lighter and darker color? And I have a comment about that. I grew up in Cameroon and I moved here 27 years ago. And what I found out is that growing up in Cameroon, I was going to school, I didn't have a role model. You know, I didn't have a role model. I studied, and all the books that I read, that I studied in school, all those books were written in foreign countries, and they still are. We have a program in Cameroon now, educating girls. We have a program for girls' education in Cameroon now. And when we started the project, we saw this issue. They're still there. But what we did is to educate girls, to tell them that we black person or look white to be beautiful. So, and that's something that I've noticed, and we keep talking about in our program, because we started a tutoring program in Cameroon, and the first time that the girls came in, they were looking, they could look straight to the person who was in front of them. And we trained the teacher to give respect. And the slogan in the classroom is respect yourself and respect others. So we taught the girl how to respect each other. We taught the teacher how to respect the girls and respect themselves, to show that respect. And now, 2 years after we came in, since we came in, the girls, they're so engaged. They talk to each other. They support each other. Initially, the parents said to us, "Oh, we don't know. When you're coming from America, you want to implement something that you bring from America here. We don't act in this culture like that." We saw that in the classroom. We don't let the teacher hit the girls. And we said, "No, you don't do that here. One of the teachers hit one of the girls, then we go to prison." We will do that. And just recently, I was in Cameroon in August, and parents, father in the village, because we're working in the rural village, father will come to us and then we say, "Oh, you are a magician." And I said, "Why do you call us magician?" And he said, "You did something that we didn't expect that would work. We have girls now that are respectful, they're succeeding in school, and not only they're succeeding in school, there is a ripple effect that even the boys that were not studying, they're also succeeding in school." So I wanted to make that little comment. So
Thank you very much. That, and actually you're bringing us home, because going back to the movie, towards the end of the movie, where we see everything that has happened between the big fight between T'Challa and Killmonger. But the end is, T'Challa coming back to the United States, and that scene with the young boy, he's looking at him and he's like, "Wait a minute, like, what's that vehicle back there?" It's like, "Who are you?" And, that smile is, I think you're talking about bringing back resources, but also creating a space for the next generation, or for people to see. Wakanda opened its borders, and now it's bringing its gift to the world, so to speak. So, in that case, how do we make Wakanda real? Or how do you intend to make Wakanda real? In your way.
I teach, I talk to the pumpkins. Because they're the next ones. So I'm like, look, I give them my thoughts on things. I get them to think about it. I think it's one of the reasons I love being in the classroom, is because I get to teach African American literature. I get to tell my students about these things, and I tell everyone, it's like, go back and share what you've learned, and let's make it better. I would say learn as much as you can, find folks to be friends with. But the other thing I would suggest is, we live in a world now where you can write and post things, and it can be seen all over the world. I think the more of us that are sharing our narratives, whether it's, in sort of storytelling form, or just even, long form essay, or even in tweets, I think the more that we put out there, the better. Like, one of the things I'm really excited about is no one can ever say there was no dissent. If something happens and we get buried and we get uncovered 20,000 years from now, there will be proof that we didn't just sit back and let things happen to us. So I do think the more stories that we're sharing, not being afraid to share your stories, encourage your children to share their stories, the better. And also, let's get across these generations. Let's talk to each other across generations as well.
Okay, I also teach, I probably should have said this up front. I love Black Panther, literally, I love the Ta-Nehisi Coates, but Wakanda is kind of trash. So, in the sense that it is exactly what we've been talking about. It's disconnected from everything else African. It is Wakanda, meanwhile, all other thing African is being oppressed. They're just sitting here sipping tea and minding their own business, and slavery going on around here. So I personally say, I wouldn't want to be Wakanda, I'd like to be all the other people trying to find some kind of connection with one another. That's just me. I also think T'Challa is trash.
Oh, come on.
And,
Come on now.
and T'Chaka is, his father was Shona
No, his
trash.
father
The kid was the only one who was right. But other than that,
Arya had some points too.
yeah.
The women were involved.
Siri wanted to, didn't want to go to Oakland. She wanted to go to Coachella. She had a problem. I like, yeah.
But T'Challa just got the job.
That just
T'Challa just got the job though. He didn't really understand.
I'm more Oakland forever, but Killmonger. But then, you know.
Oh, well, what can we do? So I told my story going from northwest to southeast. So I think everyone should make a conscious decision to reach out to the other side of whatever their border or divide is. As far as Wakanda or Black Panther, I actually have a different perspective. I think it was an incredible opportunity. Someone gave us a blueprint for a vision to dream. So we talk about create a narrative, invent a new Africa, change the reality, but nobody gave us a model of what that can look like. So that really expanded imagination, and I'm so glad they put that in the world. So travel, I think there's transformation that comes from travel. And I tell my friends and my people, every Black person has this aspiration of going to Africa. I think it starts with choosing a country, putting a date on a calendar, and start making a conscious step to doing that. So I would leave you with that.
That's nice.
I see Wakanda as a representation of all of what's good across the continent and across all Black people. As a representation. So I think that what I do is I encourage people to look for how Africa represents itself within them. And I think that's a step, part of a bunch of steps that we've been giving all evening, that allows you to put one step forward towards not only better understanding yourself, but better understanding yourself in the global diaspora.
I like the movie. I think that it just allowed us to begin a conversation, and I think that that's a really good start. These conversations have been had before, and I think that it just created, a different way of having different perspectives and talking about things, and it allowed us to be able to take kids to see it and to dream and to have just the dialogue. And I think it also, and I know Lola and I have been trying to work on this, it also gave us an opportunity to realize that Black people are giving, which in a lot of narratives, it's never seen as Black people give. It's always we're receiving something. We're the beneficiaries for some reason. Giving, yeah, and you see that whether it's Save the Children with the all of that, and they've slightly done a little bit better job, but they're still exploiting people of color all over the world and act like Black people don't give. As y'all know, the museum was funded mostly by Black folk, but we're gonna go ahead and just end it there because I don't really get it.
So on behalf of, first of all, thank you all for a very engaging, I hope very informative and engaging conversation. Just as I told you I was going to come back to hit you up with that pledge. So again, this is the day one of the roadshow, and this is the first one. Our goal is to do the roadshow in all those cities. That's New York, Atlanta, Chicago, LA, Houston, because there's a lot of value, and I hope that this is a representation, or just smaller taste of the conversations we can have around the country, and meeting people so that we can actually dig deeper. And I'm sure when we do this conversation in New York, it'll be totally different. And so a few things you can do is, one, tell your folks in those cities to, one, follow Diaspora Rise Up on Instagram or sign up for our newsletter. And two, we really do need your support. So if you are willing to, there are pledge cards. Please raise your hand if you would like to receive a pledge card. Thank you. There's a few people here. Thank you. And on Thursday at 1230 99th Street in Northwest, part 2 is going to happen, where we're going to showcase 14 amazing businesses. Gina's business is going to be there. Diafon's going to be there. Kat will be there. Thank God. You could show up too. But it's an opportunity for you to also show through commerce and sales that we can support. As Rashida said, this kind of giving, we're asking you to give of your money. So thank you all for a wonderful evening. Have a safe trip back to your place. And please make sure you take some flyers at the end. Have a great one.